August 2, 1945. On a small clearing in the steaming jungle of Morotai, Dutch New Guinea, an exhausted, handcuffed Japanese colonel walked under the sun. The highest-ranking Japanese officer captured in the Pacific War. The men who marched him in were not seasoned white veterans or headline units. They were members of the 93rd Infantry Division, the Blue Helmet Division, an army within an army. 14,000 American soldiers, over 90% African American, who had to fight two wars at once, one against an enemy in the jungle and another against prejudice, suspicion, and Jim Crow at home. This is their story. This is the story of men who had to prove they deserved to fight for a country that didn't believe they could. The story of the 93rd Infantry Division is not just a campaign map with pins and dates. It is a portrait of men who answered a country's call while their country refused to see them as equals. They trained in desert sands and swampy islands, they loaded ships at night, they marched into jungle hell, and all the while they returned home to Jim Crow. From Fort Huachuca to Bougainville to Morotai, their path would be paved in both courage and contradiction, and the capture of Colonel Kisou Ouchi would become a stark, undeniable moment in a larger struggle. The 93rd's roots stretch back to World War I, when Black American regiments fought under French command and earned hard-won respect. Those regiments returned decorated with the French Croix de Guerre, but not with full honors at home. As the world again plunged into war in 1939, planners debated how to use African American soldiers. 4 black divisions were proposed, only 2 materialized in combat roles, the 92nd in Italy and the 93rd in the Pacific. On May 15, 1942, the 93rd was activated at Fort Huachuca, Arizona, a remote post long associated with black troops, where Army leaders hoped segregation would cause less friction. They were wrong. Fort Huachuca was both refuge and trap. It housed the nation's largest African-American hospital, staffed entirely by black medical personnel. But everything was segregated: separate barracks, mess halls, service clubs, and even hospitals. The 93rd brought dependence and dread. Education gaps and biased Army tests left the division with alarming AGCT scores. Only 0.1% rated Class 1, while 45% were Class 5. Those tests measured reading and comprehension, not courage or resolve. They measured opportunity denied. Commanders were often reluctant to lead the 93rd. Major General Charles P. Hall, a Mississippi native and World War I veteran, was assigned first. Brigadier General William Spence commanded artillery. Many white lieutenants resented their assignment, making leadership continuity a constant challenge. The 93rd converted to the Army's triangular division. 3 regiments, the 25th, 368th, and 369th, supported by field artillery battalions, engineers, medical units, quartermaster, and signal companies. Their training schedule read like any other division's: 7 months of basics and specialization, then 14 weeks of maneuvers, including the Louisiana maneuvers, where the Blue Army and the Red Army chased each other across swamps and hills. Reports from commanders like Lieutenant General Walter Kruger and Brigadier General Benjamin Davis recognized the division's competence, yet Army leaders like General Marshall and Lieutenant General Leslie McNair debated whether black divisions should operate intact or be parceled out, a debate rooted more in prejudice than in performance. In early 1944, the 93rd shipped west, but it was not kept whole. Elements were scattered across the Pacific. The 25th and support units remained on Guadalcanal. The 368th went to the Russell Islands, the 369th to New Georgia, while other elements were sent to Wake Island. Many black troops were relegated to stevedore, guard, and labor duties, unloading ships, stacking supplies, and improving campsites. The Army justified these assignments as necessary preparation, but the men saw them as an injustice and a delay. Rumors circulated and morale frayed, yet the division's soldiers kept training, kept watching for their chance to prove themselves in combat. That chance arrived on Bougainville. Attached to the American Division, the 25th Regiment learned jungle warfare the hard way: patrols through choking undergrowth, enemy snipers hidden in banyan trees, and the stench of battlefield decay. On March 31st, Private James H. O'Banner became the first enlisted man of the 93rd to kill an enemy in combat, But the unit's baptism by fire would be painfully costly on April 7, 1944. A 180-man patrol from Company K, led by Captain James J. Curran, advanced into dense jungle vegetation and soon dissolved into chaotic close-range fighting. Commands blurred, visibility vanished, and platoons became isolated. In 40 minutes, the company suffered 10 dead and 20 wounded. Survivors later described how the only steady figure in the melee was Sergeant Ralph Broden, a white non-commissioned officer who rallied men and directed withdrawal with calm courage. The investigation that followed exposed as much about the Army's biases as about combat realities. 14 Corps Commander Major General Oscar W. Griswold judged the 25th's performance as needing improvement, blaming poor individual and unit jungle training and the perceived inadequacies of junior black officers. Division commanders disagreed. The inquiry was tangled with missing photographs, conflicting testimony, and decisions made in a climate predisposed to blame black soldiers for chaos. 2 enlisted men were court-martialed and returned stateside, while white officers implicated were quietly reassigned, an outcome that left bitter questions about fairness and judgment. Yet the 93rd's record held acts of valor that could not be dismissed. Private Isaac Sermon, wounded multiple times, kept firing his Browning automatic rifle across 600 yards before collapsing, and Staff Sergeant Rothschild Webb guided wounded men through enemy territory to safety. For their heroism, both received Silver Stars. On May 17th, Lieutenant Charles P. Collins led a patrol under overwhelming fire, and, though blinded temporarily by wounds, his leadership ensured the survival of many. These stories, often overshadowed in official reports, demonstrated the grit and sacrifice of men who refused to be defined by the limits others imposed. By late 1944, 2 events reshaped the 93rd's trajectory. Major General Raymond G. Lehman fell ill and was replaced by Major General Harry H. Johnson, a World War I veteran with orders from General Douglas MacArthur to transform the 93rd into a fighting division. And the voices of civil rights leaders and the Negro press, including NAACP Executive Secretary Walter F. White, brought public scrutiny to the treatment of black soldiers. Public pressure combined with battlefield necessity, and in April 1945, the 93rd at last prepared to land on Morotai, an island MacArthur eyed as a strategic springboard to the Philippines. The approach to Morotai was tense. Rumors and racial hatred simmered between the 93rd and the departing 31st Dixie Division. Stories of MPs beating black soldiers and whispered threats of lynching painted the arrival with danger. Nelson Peary, a black platoon leader, recalled seeing white MPs with rifles on the shore and feeling a charge in the air more terrifying than combat. The landing could have escalated into a race riot, but discipline and the measured courage of leaders like Captain Williams, a black company commander who strode between armed groups and calmed the scene, defused the immediate violence. The 31st soon left for the Philippines, and the 93rd settled into patrols, unloading ships, and improving harbor facilities, now working shoulder to shoulder with Australian counterparts. The fighting on Morotai was small-scale but relentless. 2 to 3 week patrols sought straggling Japanese holdouts in riverbeds, ridges, and mangrove swamps. Lieutenant Richard L. Crawford emerged as an effective patrol leader. On May 24th, a 12-man patrol trailed footprints into the jungle and surprised a small party of Kempei Tai, the feared Japanese military police, killing 6. Crawford's patrols continued, gathering intelligence and harassing enemy positions. On July 11th, they found a wounded Japanese who, for rations and care, disclosed the location of a nearby camp tied to Colonel Kisou Ouchi. Homing in on sporadic leads and sounding like woodcutting in the jungle, Crawford's patrol closed in on August 2nd. They stumbled into a 4-hut camp where several Japanese were napping. Some had just unloaded supplies and were bathing in the river. The patrol tried to induce surrender, but the Japanese resisted. A firefight erupted. 7 were killed in the camp, 2 fled wounded into the jungle, and 1 was captured. That lone prisoner turned out to be Colonel Kisou Ouchi, the commander whose capture would reverberate beyond Morotai. As Sergeant Jack Mackenzie led Ouchi away, a Japanese man who had feigned death leapt up to attack. Mackenzie fired his carbine from the hip while still holding the prisoner, killing the attacker and ensuring Ouchi remained in custody. Ouchi's capture carried symbolic weight. For capturing him, Sergeant Alphonsia Dillon received the Silver Star, while Sergeant Albert Morrison and Privates First Class Robert A. Evans and Elmer Sloan earned Bronze Stars. More importantly, the colonel's detention encouraged more than 600 Japanese on Morotai to come out of hiding and surrender. The patrols were no longer anonymous. Their success exposed a tactical effectiveness that could not be dismissed by distant commanders or skeptical public opinion. The 93rd's men, long relegated to labor, had taken a high-ranking enemy commander under combat conditions, a fact that reframed debates about their capability. The 93rd did not see a large-scale, headline-grabbing campaign after Morotai, but their contributions were substantial. From April 10 to July 10, 1945, the division discharged and offloaded 311,552 tons of supplies and equipment, moved thousands of Allied troops, and improved harbors, airstrips, roads, and camps, logistics, and security tasks essential to MacArthur's island-hopping strategy. Combat continued elsewhere. On July 17, 1945, a patrol from Company 1 of the 368th Regiment on Jolo Island was ambushed. Staff Sergeant Leonard E. Dowden crawled forward and assaulted a machine gun position with grenades despite mortal wounds. He fell and was posthumously awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the only DSC earned by a 93rd soldier in the war. When the war ended, the 93rd's tally of honors was impressive. 825 military awards for valor and meritorious service, including 1 Distinguished Service Cross, 1 Distinguished Service Medal, 5 Silver Stars, 5 Legions of Merit, 686 Bronze Stars, and 27 Air Medals. The division sailed home and was deactivated at Camp Stoneman, California on February 3, 1946. Yet homecoming did not erase the chains of Jim Crow. Celebrations were cut short when a white officer ordered black veterans to cease firing their rifles in celebration while white troops kept shooting. Weapons were confiscated from black soldiers even as white units continued rejoicing. Many veterans felt their service had only shifted their fight from the Pacific's jungles to the segregated streets and lunch counters of the United States. 2 years after the 93rd's deactivation, President Harry S. Truman signed an order desegregating the armed forces, a measure that acknowledged, belatedly, the bravery and sacrifice of black soldiers. But the measure did not erase the lived experience of returning veterans. Some found acceptance and affirmation in moments. Others found humiliation and restriction restored. A 93rd veteran's Rye Bitter line captured it. "I got through fighting in the PTO, and now I've got to fight in the STO USA." A poignant reminder that service abroad did not guarantee dignity at home. The legacy of the 93rd is complex and quietly powerful. Formed amid suspicion, tested in brutal environments, criticized when casualties mounted, lauded for acts of heroism, and partially vindicated only when their achievements were impossible to ignore. The division forced a nation to confront contradictions between creed and practice. The capture of Colonel Ouchi remains a stark, undeniable moment. Men who were doubted at home had taken a key enemy commander in the Pacific. But perhaps the truer victory is quieter. These soldiers helped shift public perception and policy, piece by patient piece, and their endurance pushed the arc of American history a little closer to justice. History often remembers battlefields, strategies, and generals, but the 93rd teaches another lesson. Valor is colorblind. Courage is not segregated, and history belongs to those who endure. On that August day in 1945, a colonel from a defeated empire walked in chains. The men who captured him were black Americans from towns and farms across the United States who returned to a country that had asked them to fight for freedoms they themselves had not fully enjoyed. Their story is stamped by medals and mended by memory, a narrative of sacrifice, struggle, and the long work of a nation learning to live up to its promises.